I had been driving for nearly 10 hours straight when the radio came to life. At first, I thought it was just static. White noise, the usual late-night nothingness that fills the empty stretches of road. Then I heard the voices. Faint, hushed, barely above a whisper. I turned up the volume, my stomach tightening. It was a conversation. At least 3 different voices. And they were talking about me. He's still moving. A crackle of static. Do you think he sees us? The voices were flat, emotionless, like they weren't really talking, just repeating words. I grabbed the CB mic, my hands suddenly cold with sweat. This is Rig 208, heading eastbound on Highway 50. Anyone out there? Silence. Then, keep the lights off. I felt a chill creep up my spine. I checked my mirrors. Nothing but darkness. Just me and the empty highway. But the voices on the radio? They were still there. And they were getting louder. I switched channels, flipping through the frequencies. Nothing. Just that same distorted transmission. He's not stopping. My stomach twisted. I flicked my high beams on, scanning the road ahead. The desert stretched out endlessly in every direction. No other trucks. No taillights. So who the hell was talking? I reached for the radio again. This is Rig 208. Anyone reading me? The voices stopped. For a second, I thought it was over. Then, through the crackling static, I heard something that turned my blood to ice. A low, drawn-out laugh. And then, barely above a whisper, he's looking in the wrong place. I checked my mirrors again. Still nothing. Just a dark, endless road. I swallowed hard. My fingers tightened around the wheel. Then, in my rearview mirror, I saw them. Headlights. A convoy of trucks. At least 5 of them. They weren't there a second ago. They had just appeared. And the worst part? Their headlights weren't on. I watched in disbelief as the convoy moved closer. Fast. Too fast. My foot hovered over the gas pedal. They weren't honking. Weren't signaling. They were just closing in. I grabbed the radio again, my voice shaking. Whoever's behind me, identify yourself. Silence. Then, he sees us now. I felt my pulse spike. That voice wasn't coming from the CB. It was coming from the passenger seat. I turned my head so fast my neck popped. Empty. The seat beside me was completely empty. But the second I looked away from the road, the headlights in my mirror vanished, like they had never been there at all. I drove for another hour before I finally pulled into a rest stop. The place was deserted. No other trucks. I killed the engine and sat there, gripping the wheel, trying to catch my breath. Then the radio crackled again. We almost had him. I grabbed the CB mic, my hands shaking. What the hell do you want? Static. Then, clearer than before. We still might. Knock. 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 I nearly jumped out of my seat. The sound had come from outside the truck, right at the passenger door. I turned my head, slowly, my stomach twisting, and there, standing in the dark, was a man. I don't know how long I sat there, staring. The man stood perfectly still, dressed in a dark jumpsuit, covered in grime. His face was pale, almost gray, and his eyes were completely black. No whites, no irises, just black pits, staring at me. He didn't knock again, didn't move, just stood there, waiting. I forced myself to blink, and in that split second, he was gone. I threw the truck into gear and got the hell out of there. Didn't stop, didn't check my mirrors. I just drove, and for the next 20 miles, the radio stayed silent. I started to think maybe it was over. Then the CB crackled one last time. He's still awake. The laugh came next, low, echoing, and then, almost playfully, we'll try again tomorrow. I don't use my CB radio anymore. I don't drive alone at night. And when I check my mirrors, I don't look too long. Because I know, somewhere out there, on some forgotten stretch of road, they're still waiting for me. I was running low on fuel. That stretch of highway wasn't one I took often, but my usual route had been shut down due to a landslide, and dispatch rerouted me through a two-lane back road in Utah. No towns, no houses, just miles of open nothing. The fuel light blinked on. 40 miles left. I cursed under my breath. There hadn't been a gas station in hours. If I didn't find one soon, I'd be stranded. Then, like an answer to my problem, I saw it. A gas station, sitting just off the next exit. Small, old, but open. I should have kept driving, because by the next morning, that gas station didn't exist. I pulled in and parked at the only functioning pump. The station looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. The paint on the sign was peeling, and a single yellowed fluorescent bulb buzzed above the door. A man stood behind the counter inside. I could see him through the window. He wasn't moving, just staring, right at me. I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling crawling up my spine as I stepped out of the cab. The night air was too still. No wind, no crickets, just an eerie dead silence. The old pump rattled as I lifted the nozzle. No credit card slot. I sighed. Prepay inside. I glanced through the window again. The man was still staring. I walked in, trying to act normal. "Hey, need a full tank," I said, pulling out my wallet. The man behind the counter didn't respond, didn't blink, just stood there, stiff and unmoving. His skin was too pale, almost waxy, like he wasn't real. I hesitated. You good, man?" Then, in a voice too deep, too slow, he finally spoke. "You shouldn't be here." A cold wave of dread crawled up my spine. "Excuse me?" I forced a nervous laugh. The man didn't blink, didn't move, just stared at me, unblinking. "You should leave." I shifted uncomfortably. "Yeah, I just need some fuel, then I'll be on my way." Silence. Then, "You don't understand." He leaned forward, his voice lowering to a whisper. "You need to leave before they come back." Every hair on my body stood on end. "Who?" Before I could ask, the store lights flickered. A deep, electric hum filled the air. And then, from behind the aisles, I heard footsteps. Slow, dragging, coming toward me. I didn't wait to see who or what was back there. I turned and bolted for the door, bursting into the night. But the second I stepped outside, everything was different. The gas station looked older, like it had been abandoned for years. The paint was almost completely gone. The windows were cracked and smeared with dirt. The buzzing light above the entrance, flickering like it was about to go out. My truck was still at the pump, but now the pump looked rusted and broken, like it hadn't worked in decades. The worst part? The attendant was gone. I turned back to the building, my pulse hammering. Inside, the store was empty. No shelves, no counter, no signs that anyone had ever been there. My breath came fast. I backed away toward my truck, my brain scrambling for an explanation. Maybe I was hallucinating. Maybe exhaustion was messing with my head. Then, just beyond the station, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There was no road. The highway was gone. Just miles and miles of endless desert. Like the gas station had been cut off from the world. And I was trapped. I jumped into my truck, locking the doors, trying to stay calm. I turned the key. The engine wouldn't start. The lights inside the cab flickered. And then, knock, knock, knock. I swallowed hard. The sound came from the passenger door. I turned my head and saw a figure standing outside the truck. It wasn't the attendant. This was something else. Tall, thin. Its face was too long. Its skin stretched tight over its skull. And its eyes, pitch black. Not human. Not anymore. I sat frozen as it slowly lifted one bony hand and pressed it against the glass. I don't remember much after that. Just a blinding white light. A sound like static in my skull. And then, darkness. I woke up to the sound of my engine running. The fuel tank was full. I was still at the gas station. But now, it looked normal. Like it had when I first pulled in. The store was intact. The pump was working. The highway was back. But something was different. I checked the clock on my dashboard. I had been there for 6 hours. I didn't remember anything past the first 10 minutes. And the worst part? My logbook showed no stop, like I had never been there at all. I got out of there as fast as I could. By the time I reached the next town, my hands were still shaking. I asked the first guy I saw about the old gas station off the highway. He just stared at me. "What gas station?" "The one about 30 miles west of here," I said. "Small place, old pumps, right off the exit." His face went pale. Son, he said slowly, that station burned down 30 years ago. I don't take that route anymore. I don't stop at lonely gas stations in the middle of nowhere. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder, who or what filled my tank? Truck stop diners at 3 in the morning are a special kind of eerie. Half the people inside are dead on their feet. The other half don't look quite right. You get a lot of folks who don't talk, don't look up, just stir their coffee and stare at the wall like they're trying to disappear into it. I thought I'd seen every type of road-weary soul there was. But that night, I saw something else. Something that shouldn't have been there. And she hasn't stopped watching me since. The place was almost empty when I walked in. A small, old diner attached to a truck stop off Route 89. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, faded plastic booths, the smell of burnt coffee and greasy food lingering in the air. There were only 3 people inside. The cook, a waitress, and her. She sat alone at the farthest booth, back pressed against the wall. She wasn't eating. She wasn't drinking. She was just watching me. I sat at the counter and ordered a coffee, doing my best to ignore her. But it was hard, because she never blinked. I could feel her eyes burning into me, unmoving, unblinking. When the waitress poured my coffee, I cleared my throat. Hey, what's her deal? The waitress froze for a fraction of a second. Then she forced a too tight smile. What do you mean? I nodded toward the woman. She hasn't stopped staring at me since I walked in. The waitress didn't turn around, didn't even glance in the woman's direction. She just shook her head. Honey, that table's been empty all night. A slow chill spread through my chest. I turned my head toward the booth. She was still there, still watching me. She was smiling now. I stood up so fast my coffee spilled over the counter. The waitress backed away, confused. Sir? My pulse was hammering in my ears. She's right there, I hissed. But as soon as the words left my mouth, the lights overhead flickered. For less than a second, the diner was plunged into darkness. And when the lights came back on, the booth was empty. I backed away toward the door, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps. The waitress gave me a worried look. You okay? I didn't answer. I just grabbed my keys and got the hell out of there. I told myself it was just exhaustion, that I was seeing things. But when I got back to my truck, she was waiting for me, standing just outside my cab, still smiling. I locked the doors, my heart hammering. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, her too wide smile stretched across her face. Then she tilted her head, like she was listening to something, and a second later, she climbed into my passenger seat. I slammed my foot on the gas. The truck roared to life, tires screeching as I tore out of the lot. I didn't care if I ran over something. I just needed to go. I refused to look at her, didn't check my mirrors, didn't turn my head, but I could feel her, sitting there, watching me, smiling. I drove for an hour before I finally pulled over. My hands were shaking. The seat beside me was empty. I let out a long, shaky breath. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I just needed sleep. I checked my phone, and my stomach dropped. There was a new photo in my camera roll. A picture of me, driving, taken from the passenger seat. I threw my phone onto the dashboard. I didn't sleep that night, didn't move. Just sat there, gripping the wheel, waiting for morning. When the sun finally rose, I convinced myself it was over, that I had just been exhausted, seeing things. I kept driving. The next truck stop was 2 states over. I stopped to refuel, grabbed some food, sat at the counter. The place was busy, full of people. I let myself relax. Then, as I was eating, I felt it again. The eyes. I turned my head, and my stomach turned to ice. She was there, sitting at a booth across the diner, watching me, smiling, like she had been waiting. I left my food untouched, didn't say a word. I got back in my truck and started driving, and I haven't stopped since. But no matter where I go, no matter how far I run, she's always waiting, sitting at a booth, watching, smiling, and she never blinks. I was about 6 hours into my haul when my radio crackled to life. At first, I thought it was just static. The usual late-night nonsense, stray signals, other truckers chatting miles away. Then I heard it. A man's voice. Raspy. Desperate. "Can anybody hear me? Please. I need help." I adjusted the frequency, thinking maybe a driver had broken down. "This is Rig 249 heading eastbound. What's your location?" Silence. Then, a few seconds later, "I don't know where I am." A chill crawled down my spine. "All right, man. What's around you? Any landmarks?" More static. Then, "It's just dark." Something about his voice didn't sit right with me. It was off. Flat. Like he wasn't really talking, just repeating words. I leaned forward, gripping the wheel tighter. "Are you on the highway?" Another pause. Then, barely above a whisper, "I think I used to be." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The CB popped and crackled, like someone was adjusting the mic on the other end. Then, the voice came through again. "Please. I think something's following me." I swallowed hard. "Where are you exactly?" "I'll call for help." The radio whined with static. Then the voice said something that sent ice through my veins. "You're close." I checked my mirrors. The highway behind me stretched empty. No headlights. No taillights. Just miles of dark, endless road. I tried to shake it off. Probably some trucker messing around. Maybe a bad transmission. Then my radio crackled again. But this time, the voice was clearer. Like it was coming from inside the cab. "I can see your lights." My blood ran cold. I checked my mirrors again. Still nothing. Just darkness. But the uneasy feeling in my gut was growing. "Where exactly do you see me?" I asked slowly. A long pause. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Look behind you." I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I didn't want to look. Didn't want to know what I might see. But my hands moved on their own. I checked the mirror. At first, there was nothing. Then, far down the road, a pair of headlights appeared. I let out a shaky breath. Just another truck. Probably some idiot messing around on the radio. Then my CB crackled, and the man's voice said, "That's not me." I felt my stomach drop. The headlights were getting closer. Too fast. Way too fast. Like whoever was driving was barreling straight toward me. I grabbed the mic. "If that's not you, then who the hell is it?" The voice didn't answer. The headlights grew brighter. Closer. Then, just when they were about to slam into my back bumper, they vanished. I slammed on the brakes. My truck screeched to a stop, the engine roaring in protest. The road ahead stretched empty. No cars. No taillights. Nothing. Like those headlights had never been there at all. My CB crackled. A soft, wet breath filled the speakers. Then the man whispered, "It's behind you now." I didn't look. Didn't breathe. I just floored it. The truck lurched forward, tires skidding against the pavement. I was going too fast for these roads. If I wasn't careful, I'd end up jackknifing. But I didn't care. I had to get away. I switched frequencies on the radio, desperate to reach another driver. "Breaker, breaker, this is Rig 249. Is anyone out there?" Silence. Then, a voice. But not the same one. This one was flat, monotone, and it said something that made my stomach turn to ice. "You're using my truck number." I nearly lost control of the wheel. "What?" I rasped. The voice didn't respond. I checked my logs, my license, everything. My rig number was 249. I had been using it for years. Then, my CB crackled again. The original voice, the desperate one, came back. "I think I was you. Once." The air in the cab grew heavy. I could hear my own breathing. Fast. Uneven. Something about the radio felt wrong. Like if I spoke again, something would answer that wasn't supposed to. Then my headlights flickered, and in the glow of my dashboard, I saw something move in the passenger seat. A shadow. Shifting. Unfolding. Something tall. With black, empty eyes. I didn't think. Didn't breathe. I yanked the wheel hard, veering off the highway. The truck shuddered as I skidded onto the shoulder, dust kicking up around me. And then, in an instant, the presence was gone. I didn't touch my CB for the rest of the drive. Didn't check the mirrors. Didn't stop until I reached a well-lit truck stop hours later. When I finally did, I sat there in my seat, shaking. The cab was empty, but the radio was still on. The channel was dead silent. Then, just as I reached to turn it off, one final message crackled through. "We'll find another way back." I don't use my CB anymore. I don't drive that stretch of road, because I know now, there's something out there. Something that got lost on the highway long ago. And every night, through static and broken signals, it's still trying to get home. I was about 4 hours into my night haul when I saw him. A man standing dead center in the middle of the highway. He wasn't waving for help, wasn't stumbling like he'd been in an accident. He was just standing there, completely still. His back was turned to me, his thin frame illuminated by my high beams. He wore a faded brown jacket and jeans, both torn and stained like he had been walking for miles. His hair was unkempt, shoulder-length, tangled. I laid on the horn. He didn't move, didn't even flinch. My stomach twisted. He was too close now. If he didn't move, I was going to hit him. I yanked the wheel to the right at the last second, just barely missing him. My truck shuddered as I veered onto the shoulder, tires kicking up dust and gravel. I fought to regain control, my pulse pounding in my ears. When I finally came to a stop, my whole body was shaking. I turned my head. The man was gone. I sat there, gripping the wheel, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps. I checked the mirror, checked again. The road behind me was empty. He should have been right there, standing where I left him, but he wasn't. The air inside the cab felt thick, like the pressure had changed. I swallowed hard, trying to slow my heartbeat. Maybe I'd imagined him. Maybe the road had messed with my eyes. Then my radio crackled. A burst of static. Then a voice. Soft. Raspy. "You should have hit me." I spun around so fast my neck popped. The cab was empty. My breath hitched. I hadn't touched the radio. The volume knob was still turned all the way down. Then, knock, knock, knock. 3 soft taps on my passenger side window. I didn't turn my head. I couldn't. I felt frozen in place, my hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. Another knock. Louder this time. Knock, knock, knock. I forced myself to move, just enough to glance at the mirror. And my stomach dropped. He was standing there, right outside my truck. My headlights barely reached him, but I could see enough. His face was pale, almost gray. His eyes were too wide, too dark. And his lips, they were stretched into a grin that looked too big for his face. My chest tightened. I locked the doors. He didn't move, didn't blink, just kept grinning. The radio crackled again. Then the voice whispered, "Let me in." I slammed my foot on the gas. The truck lurched forward, tires screeching against the pavement. I didn't care if he was still standing there. Didn't care if he chased after me. I just had to get away. The road stretched out before me, empty and dark. I gripped the wheel, forcing myself to focus. I checked the mirrors. No sign of him. He was gone. For the next few miles, I drove in silence. Then my passenger door handle clicked, like someone was trying to open it from the inside. I almost ran off the road. The door was locked. I knew it was locked, but something was inside my truck. I felt it before I saw it. The air turned ice cold. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I turned my head, and there he was, sitting in the passenger seat, still grinning, still watching me with those 2 wide eyes. I let out a choked scream and slammed the brakes. But the second the truck stopped, he was gone. I didn't sleep that night, didn't stop, didn't slow down. I drove until the sky turned gray with morning, until my body was too exhausted to keep going. When I finally pulled into a truck stop, my hands were still shaking. I got out, leaned against the side of the cab, tried to breathe. It was over. Had to be. Then I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. I turned, and there, taped to my passenger side window, was a piece of paper. For words, written in neat, shaky handwriting. "You should have stopped." It's been months since that night. I don't drive that stretch of road anymore. I don't drive at night. And I never stop for anyone, because I know he's still out there, still waiting, still smiling. And if I ever stop again, I don't think I'll be the one driving away.